In this lesson today, we are again going to be looking at a special version of a rate or proportion, and today's idea is percent. Yesterday we looked at unit rates, which was per 1. Today we want to look at percent, which is per 100. Okay, so a similar idea to yesterday, that we can convert ratios, proportions, into something equivalent. Just here we want to make them out of 100 all the time. So we'll start with the basics. Okay, 4 out of 10 is the same as something out of 100. How do I turn a 10 into 100? Well, I times by 10. If I do that to the bottom, I got to do that to the top, and 4 times 10 makes 40. In the second one, I got to turn a 25 into 100. Now, if you can't figure out how to turn a 25 into 100, do the opposite. Let's turn 100 into a 25. If I divide 100 by 25, I get 4. If I divide to go from big to small, I need to do the opposite to go the opposite direction. 16 times 4 makes 64. And then the last one, a 30 has to turn to 100, or 100 into a 30. If I try dividing, so I did the last one, this one turns out to be a really weird number, 3.333333, on and on forever and ever and ever. Okay, gotta go forward, times it by that really weird number, and sometimes we get weird numbers. That's what happens in the real world. 23 times that gives us approximately 76.67. The idea of a unit rate can be helpful in those tricky cases, like the last one there. For instance, if I didn't want to do with the tricky number that we just dealt with, I could turn 23 out of 30 into something per 1, a unit rate. How do I do it? I divide by 30. That's what that says, right? 23 divided by 30. That gives me 0.7667 per 1. And if I want 100 of those, well, I times it by 100, like we did with the apple question yesterday, and I get 76.67. That's kind of a helpful trick, as I can take unit rates, what we did yesterday, and use them to help me in percentage. Okay, so we divide the fraction, like it says. That's what that line means, right? 12 over 40, that means divide by, and then times it by 100 to get my 100 portions. And we call that finding the percent. Take a look at the first one here, this example. I have 12 out of 20. Maybe that's your quiz mark or an assignment mark. What percent is that? Well, if I divide it, make it into a unit rate, I get 0.6. At the unit rate, I want 100 units to get my percentage, so I times it by 100, and I get 60%. The line means to divide. Try the next one, 45 out of 60. In other words, 45 divided by 60. It gives me 0.75. I want 100 units, so I get 75%. And we're going to combine it and do it all at one time. 36 out of 72, and then times it by 100 will give us 50%. 15 out of 12 times 100 units gives us 125%. More than 100%, more than the whole thing, which should make sense looking at the fraction, because we have more than 12. And we have 15 out of 12. If this is a quiz, it means you got some bonus marks. See, often we use fractions and decimals and percents interchangeably. So it can be helpful to be able to convert from one to the other and back and forth again. Okay. To do that, we'll look at this table. To turn a fraction into a decimal, all we do is what we were doing before, is we divide, top by bottom. To turn a decimal, a portion, a rate, a unit rate, into a percent, we multiply by 100. So we have 100 units. And to turn a percent back into a percent, sorry, into a fraction, we write it out of 100. That's our portion of 100. So percent is out of. So let's try some here. I want to turn 0.5 into a percent. Well, if I do what it says, times it by 100, that gets me 50%. As a fraction, I can write that as 50 over 100, or any equivalent version. 50 out of 100 is the same as 1/2, or 25 out of 50, or 50 out of 100. Oops, I should say 50. Okay? All those different versions of fractions are equal but different. Okay, 2/5, that's a fraction. But that line says to divide. Well, 2 divided by 5 comes out to 0.4. Times it by 100, and I get 40%. 150 is a percent out of 100. If I divide it, 150 by 100, I get 1.5. I got more than 1 because I had more than 100%. Okay, we try 0.2. 0.2 times 100 is 20%. Percent is out of 100, so 20 out of 100, or 2 out of 10, or any other version of that. And the last one, 1%, well, that's 1 out of 100. I can't really write it any other way, smaller. But I can divide it, and I'll get 0.01. All different ways of converting decimals to fractions to percents and back again. And I can start at anywhere I want on the table and find the other ones. Okay, let's do a little bit of work with percentage now. So I'm a basketball coach, and when I play basketball, sometimes I have to shoot some free throws. I make 90% of my free throws. So that means that if I were to take 100 shots, how many should I make? Well, 90 out of 100. That's my ratio. That's my percentage. That's my portion of 100. If I were to take 50 shots, how many should I make? Well, that's really just an equivalent ratio. How many out of 50? Well, if I divide this by 2, I get 50. If I divide the top by 2, I get 45. Again, if I know 10 shots, or I take 10 shots, how many should I make? Well, that's another equivalent ratio. Divide it by 5. So let's divide it by 5. I should make 9 out of 10, which is still 90%. If I were to take 20 shots, again, we can make equivalent ratios. How many out of 20? Well, how do I make that? Oh, I got times it by 2. So 18 out of 20. Every one of these questions is an equivalent ratio. They all come out to 90%. If I were to divide one, let's pick one at random here, 45 divided by 50 times 100 comes out to 90%. That special proportion, that special fraction. Okay. These are all examples of finding a percentage of something. But I don't want to have to go through this process every single time to have to convert. So we have a bit of a shortcut. Okay. To find the percentage of something, we can use the idea of a unit rate and then multiply. For instance, I want to find 20% of 50. Well, I know the percent is out of 100. I want to find that portion of 50. So what I do is I divide 20 by 100, like it says, and then I multiply by 50. And type in our calculators, we get 10. And what it's doing is it's saving us the time of saying, well, 20 out of 100 is the same as what out of 50. It's saving us that. Instead of dividing by 2 and dividing by 2, it's just doing it in a faster way. I can do that whenever I want to find the percentage of something. Let's take a look at the next one. 15% of 60. 15 out of 100, that's my unit rate, and I want 60 of those units. What does that come out to? 9. And you try the third one yourselves. I want 107% of 85. So 107 out of 100, here's my units, times 85. I want 85 units worth. And I get, oh, decimal this time, 90.95. Okay, let's try some word problems that deal with this kind of idea. Okay. Cornerstone High School has 1,860 students. 45% of students bike or walk to school. How many students is this? Well, if we stop and think, it's asking us to find 45% of 1,860 students. Well, we can do that. We know percentage out of 100. That gives me a unit rate. And I'm going to multiply that by the number of things I have, how many units I need. 1,860. And we end up with 837. Because it's a word problem, we need a word answer. 837 students bike or walk. Okay, you guys try the next one. Pause it, give it a try, see if you can figure it out. A gardener's 120 meter squared backyard has a lawn and garden. 65% of the yard is the lawn. What is the area of the garden? So let's see what we can figure out. 65% of the yard. Well, that's just 65 out of 100. That's my unit rate. Times my units I need, 120 of them, gives me 78 meters squared. Now be careful here. I kind of cheated. It says 65% of the yard is lawn. But I asked you to figure out how much of the area of the garden. Well, if the yard is made up of lawn and garden, and the whole thing is 120, I've got to figure out the difference to figure out how much is garden, right? Okay, 42 meters squared of the yard is garden. I'm going to make sure our answer actually answers what's being asked of us. Okay, last one. A school orders 120 calculators. The school receives a shipment containing 80% of the order, and 1/3 of these calculators is black. How many black calculators has the school received? Well, what do we got? We know 80% of the order, so 80% of the 120 are calculated. That's how many we got. So 80 out of 100 times 120 gives us 96 calculators. Okay, what do we know about these calculators? 1/3 of them are black. We're being asked how many black calculators we have. So, what are we going to do there? Well, there's a couple ways we can do this one. I'm going to show you two. Okay, two methods. We know 1 out of 3 are black. We have how many black out of the total? 96 total. And we want to know how many black. Well, we know how to solve that. I turn a 96 into a 3 divided by 32. So I've got to multiply by 32. Hey, x is 32. Or, what does a third mean? A third means, and this is just a different way of solving this, take your number and divide it by thirds, by 3. That also gives us 32. So we have two options. Either way, there are 32 black calculators. And that's today, how to do or deal with percentages. Okay. Again, as usual, there's a little sheet attached. You can give it a try. See those questions, I'm going to hand them in to me tomorrow. If you're stuck on something, come see me. Okay, we're going to do some more stuff with percent tomorrow, so it's pretty helpful to get through this one today.